I think if I didn't go to jail, I don't think I would be alive right now. That's the nature of addiction, really, is you think your survival depends on the drug.
How was your experience with ayahuasca?
It was intense. Gabor Mate, who I mentioned, I talked to him before, and he was like, Lara, you have to understand this is medicine, not drugs, and you have to think of it that way.
Hello and welcome to Humanize the Hustle. Here we believe that health and happiness is non-negotiable. Hey, welcome back to Humanize the Hustle. Today I'm excited to introduce you to our special guest, Lara Love Hardin. Over the 10 years or so I've known Lara, I've known her as a loving mother, a devoted wife, and a powerhouse in the world of literature. Lara is well educated with an MFA in creative writing, and her accomplishments are impressive. She is a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Designing Your Life by Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, and 2018 Oprah Book Club pick, The Sun Does Shine, which she co-authored with Anthony Ray Hinton about his 30 years as an innocent man on Alabama's death row. But today we're here to explore some of the themes from Lara's own remarkable life story, which are both astonishing and deeply relatable. In her newly released memoir, The Many Lives of Mama Love, Lara courageously shares her journey through the intricate tapestry of addiction, self-worth struggles, and the unwavering pursuit of redemption. This memoir touches on vital themes such as mental health, navigating complex relationships, the trials and joys of motherhood, and the resilience it takes to bounce back from life's most profound mistakes. During our conversation today, we'll journey through Lara's experiences from her battle with addiction and the path to recovery to the lingering shadows of childhood trauma. We'll also explore the transformative power of writing and the solace found within the pages of books. Perhaps most importantly, we'll delve into the profound subject of forgiveness and the art of healing when life veers off its expected course. Lara Love Hardin's story is one of resilience, hope, and unwavering belief in the capacity of the human spirit to triumph over adversity. So without further ado, let's dive into the inspiring conversation with the remarkable Lara Love Hardin. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you so much. That was a great intro.
I mean, inspired by your amazingness, I'm so excited to have you here today. Like I mentioned, we've known each other for a while, and maybe even before I get started and get into the details of everything, I do have to admit, like when I first met you, I had known that you had some kind of past, and I maybe searched the internet once. I'll be totally honest. But I didn't, I didn't find enough to really like make me dig into it more. And reading your incredible story and learning all that you've gone through made me like love you and admire you even more for so many reasons. So I think thank you first of all for putting all of your experiences in a book and sharing it with people. I think it's like so important, not only for other people to hear your story, but then also, I mean, how healing for you to share it and just like get it out there finally, right? And be like, this is what happened and this is who I am and this is who I am now. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's been very freeing, I think is the best word, just sharing the story. Because look, if I had known you had Googled me, like way back then, I would have hidden from you, and like part of the story is I spent 10 years in a whole lot of shame and living in, there's a chapter called Fucking Google, which is me living in fear of people Googling me and finding out my past and judging me from that one worst season of my life.
Yeah. Well, and, something I know we were kind of talking about a little before we got started is that like, it didn't even really faze me because when I met you, I saw you as such like a loving mother, like I said in my intro. I mean, you were in recovery at the time. I only like the vibes you gave off and who you were at that moment were so much more important to me than anything else, that you had maybe done that I didn't even like, care to even look into it deeper. I was like, oh, and I think we were also talking that I actually relate with people who have maybe made mistakes and, who are like, in a period of redemption or in a period of recovery or in a period of like, hey, I learned and now I'm better. I almost can't relate with people who have like never done anything, that they're like ashamed of or have made mistakes and, and Humanize the Hustle. I know that a lot of people will relate with the fact that, with your story of like, look, you can make a mistake and you can come back from things. And it's like making a mistake is not a life sentence.
Right.
So, which I just love.
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a life sentence.
It doesn't have to be. And I think another theme too is that, there's power in sharing your story. There's power in being honest. And there's so many people who are ready to receive your story and to relate to you in a compassionate way. That, there's also so many benefits to that. So, we're not going to spend we'll go into bits of your story and if people can like buy and read your book.
Right.
But what I'm like most interested in is, picking out the little pieces of your story and the themes and kind of digging into those. So I thought, my first question to kick us off is, you have been and are a lot of things. And what do you most want to be known for?
That's such a good question. And it's interesting because at different times in my life, I would answer that differently, right? And it's not for the work I do. And I'm not even sure it's as a mother who loved her children, who had children. I think the things I would most want to be, or I want to most be known for after I'm gone, maybe, is someone who failed spectacularly and got back up.
Yeah.
Right. And someone who helped, who had a lot of empathy. And, in my work as a literary agent, I get to, help people bring their stories. And so like, I love the underdog story. I love shining a light on other people's redemption stories. That's kind of my thing in my work. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think, as someone who was a lot of different people and all of it when I'm myself grounded in love, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. And it is your last name. So the Mama Love. And the name of your book is
Many Lives of Mama Love.
The Many Lives of Mama Love. Yes. And the main kind of theme, or one of the main themes, a main theme in your story is addiction. And addiction has been a big theme in my life. And most of my experiences with addiction have been of people not recovering. And what I really love about your story is that it is a story of recovery and redemption, and coming back from big mistakes. And, like I said earlier, addiction doesn't, or mistakes don't have to be a life sentence. And, in recovery, they talk about rock bottom. And would you say the day you got arrested and your son taken away from you was your rock bottom?
I would say the entire year I was away from my children, that I was incarcerated, was my rock bottom. That was, the day of my arrest. And, my youngest son was home and getting, where I'm handcuffed and I can't comfort him and he's taken away by strangers. That was rock bottom. But a few nights later, I don't want to give away the book, but that was really my true rock bottom. I was in a really dark place. And, you talk about redemption, and in that dark place that I was in, I thought that I believe in redemption, but I thought that I was just bad, that I didn't deserve redemption. And I think that moment of thinking there is no hope or possibility for redemption for me and I didn't deserve it, like that, I think that moment, that night, was my rock bottom.
Yeah. So when everything started to kind of sink in and the feeling you had in your body.
Yeah. And I, at that moment, I knew that I'd imploded my life so hugely and hurt my children, imploded my children's lives. And I didn't think there was going to be any coming back from that. And I didn't think I had it in me to come back from that. That's the other part of it.
Yeah. Well, your story proves so much different. And so, you made some big mistakes. You were addicted to drugs. You made some big mistakes because of that. And then you went to jail for a year. Would you say that going to jail was maybe the best thing that could have happened to you? And if not, if you didn't go to jail, how do you think your story maybe would have been different?
So I'll answer the second part first. I think if I didn't go to jail, I don't think I would be alive right now, honestly. Like, I needed something to stop me. And especially given like the progression of, I was addicted to opiates. And so, this is 2009 when I went to jail. The opioid crisis is very different now. Fentanyl overdoses. Like, I don't know that I would be alive. Honestly, I don't think. And then I think jail made everything better, even though it was horrible. Like, it made me a better human because in that moment, like, everything I was stripped away, right? Like, I wasn't a mom. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a community member. I wasn't anything I did for work. I was nothing. It was just total nothingness, I guess. And rebuilding myself from that place of nothingness. I talk in the book, I learned to meditate in jail, right? Which is a really great place to meditate. And there's easier ways to do it. But I think I really had to start. It was like being reborn in a way, like just starting over and creating who I was and what was real to me and who I want to be in the world. So I think it made me a better writer, made me a better mother, made me a better, more empathetic human. Yeah. But again, there's easier ways to do all of this. So I don't recommend people go to jail for this.
Right. Well, I guess there's rehab, but that's a whole nother set of things you need to go through. So maybe like jail was like both your rehab. It was like your rehab.
Yeah. I mean, it was, but honestly, there's more drugs in jail than I ever encountered out in the world.
That was
right?
Actually a very interesting part of the story. There was a couple times where I remember two specific parts in the story. I don't want to give away too much, but yeah, where you were almost forced to do drugs at one point just to stay safe. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of drugs in jail. That's just a fact. And there's a lot of traumatized women in jail. And there's a lot of, it's a system that doesn't always support like positive coping skills and rehabilitation, honestly. So, and it's traumatizing in its own way for, the reasons women go to jail are like very different than the reasons men go to jail. And jails were built for men, prisons were built for men. 80% of the women in jail are mothers. And, it's usually, I think that statistics, maybe I forget what the statistics are for like who's been sexually assaulted or child abuse. And in jail, those statistics, it's like 100% across the board. Like everyone is traumatized and often in there because of a domestic relationship.
Yeah. That was actually another theme of your book that I felt kind of went through many different chapters was just relationships with men and the roles that men and women play and how, and this was a question I was going to ask you later, but, the bad guy in your story, I definitely felt was like your second husband. And he was like really like the devil, I mean, he, as hard as you were trying, he was just like determined to keep you sucked into the madness that you guys had developed as a couple, the addiction and all of that. And then you also started to talk about too, the women that you were in with there, and every one of them had a story that was connected to a man in some way. And so that was definitely a theme that I picked up on quite a bit of that. And so, I mean, maybe you can just talk about that, for a moment and how that was for you to come to that realization.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I don't actually see him as the bad, like I see myself as the bad guy in my story, honestly, but it's really interesting. I told the truth.
Yeah.
And, I did let him read the book before it went to print. Mm-hmm. And his comment was, well, I guess, we're divorced now, obviously, but his comment was, I guess somebody has to be the villain. Right. And it's really interesting when you do a memoir, you tell your story because it's from my experience, my perspective, and he could write a book. And you could read that book and I could be the villain, so it's really interesting. But I was really careful to not make excuses for my choices or my behavior or the things I did. And I think, I do think I'm the bad guy in the story, but, it was a relationship and in jail, people are often there because of the relationships, the girl, the women I was in jail with were young. Some of them were barely older than my oldest son, who was 17 at the time. And, their boyfriends were drug dealers or they were, caught up in a life of crime through them or through gangs or whatever it was. So or domestic violence. There's just a lot of trauma in jail, and there's a lot of trauma in the world, but a lot of trauma in jail for women.
Right. Well, and I definitely, there were parts of the book where I definitely feel like obviously you took responsibility for what you did. You didn't sugarcoat anything. You said exactly what you did. And maybe just for context, I don't, maybe just share, like, why did you end up going to jail? What did you end up going to jail for?
So I ended up going to jail. I ended up pleading guilty to 32 felonies. And, the nature of addiction is it progresses. And, I lived in a cul-de-sac, like I had kids in private school. I was living like the sort of from the outside looking in perfect suburban life. And, I was in the throes of addiction. And so was my husband at the time. And eventually the money runs out. And so I started, taking my neighbor's mail and just, that's the nature of addiction really is you think your survival depends on the drug. And so you end up doing things that are wrong, right? Like I knew right from wrong. Like I might have been out of my mind on addiction, but I knew right from wrong. But you're in this, it's hard to explain. It's like this compulsion and this really fundamental survival skill where you think you will die if you don't take that drug. Yeah. And so then you'll do anything for survival, right? It is survival mode.
Yeah. Well, and, I mentioned in the beginning, I've dealt with so many addicts, and I have many stories of addicts that do not end in the way that yours did. Most of the stories that I have with addicts are they do not recover, and they end up dying. Mm-hmm. And so I do have a lot of experience, and it's something I practice is separating the addict from the person. It's almost like, and I've said this, because, and I think, my daughter's youngest, Hudson's friend, my youngest daughter, her friend ended up dying of fentanyl overdose a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And she spent a lot of time here at this house, for the 6 months before she died. And she was, they lie, addicts lie, as is in your book, and so, afterwards I was able to put things together and realize like how much I was being lied to and what was really going on and all of that. But, we were saying it's like, with an addict, it's almost like reasoning with the devil. You cannot reason with the devil. They are almost like when they're in the full throes of addiction, it's almost like they're possessed by something else that is not them. It is some dark thing takes over their body. And even with my mom, I've been working like a lot since my mom passed away of like trying to separate her from her addiction. Because her addiction and when she was using, that's not who she was, like at all. Like I can't, I've been learning to have more compassion for that side of her. And then they say, addiction is a disease. And so, trying to separate the person from the addiction. Anyways, I've worked really hard to do that. Yeah. I'm wondering what you think about that. I see it as them as two different people. But do you feel like maybe, is that like a cop-out? Like, do people feel like maybe it's a cop-out or, how would you help explain if you agree with that at all? Like, yeah, Lara from, what did I say? Lara, the drug addict, the neighbor from hell, as they're coined you, right. From the Lara that I know.
Yeah. I think those are like two very different people. I think if you look at addiction as a mental health issue, I think that's easier for people, right? It is. And I believe it is whether it's a disease like we might classify, cancer or something like that, that it's a mental health issue. It's a brain chemistry issue. I think you can look at like, oh, my partner when they're full of depression or anxiety, that's not who they are. Or, I think it helps to think of it as a mental health issue, I think, for people. And it is. And, it's so hard. Like, I know, like, my nature and who I am inside at my core is generous. Like, I would like, what do you need? I will give it to you. Like, so it's like a generous nature. But then in my sort of, it's a delusion you're in when you're in the throes of that sort of obsessive compulsive addiction. And I would justify like, oh, I'm going to use your credit card, Alicia, but you won't actually lose any money because you'll just let the credit card company know it's stolen. And so I'm going to use it to buy groceries, but then I'm going to feed your child, so it's not so bad. Like I was doing all of these justifications in my head to make it better and more in line with my values, but it was completely against my values. And yet I still couldn't stop. I mean, it's really hard for people to understand too, because, it's like, I love my children. I would sacrifice my life for them, any one of them in a second, and your children too, would throw myself in front of a bus, but I couldn't stop using drugs for them, right? And I tried over and over again, like I would quit and, have like a week clean and be like, oh, see, I can do that. But then I would start up again, and I was like doing this over and over. And it's interesting because I had this mantra that I used to do when I would quit. And and I haven't ever talked about this. I don't even think it's in the book, but in my head, every day to kind of get through the days of the first few days of a detox, when I was quitting on my own and just knew it was a problem for addicted to opiate, to pain pills, I would be like, choose life, choose life, choose life, because I knew in addiction, that's not what I was choosing, and, I grew up in a family of addicts. My sister was an alcoholic as a teenager, died in a drunk driving crash really young. My brother died of a heroin overdose. And so, stole money from me. And so I had, I was a late bloomer to addiction, right? Like post-college, like in my 20s. And I think I thought I could outrun it. And I thought I could out-educate myself from it and I wouldn't be like my family. And I don't know, like, if everybody has a certain set point where it becomes a problem or not, like,
Yeah.
Like I was prescribed Vicodin, after I gave birth, and, and other people were, way back when it was, you have an earache, here's some Vicodin, here's a sample pack of it. And I think I had just had a lower threshold from genetics or brain chemistry or nature or nurture. Like, I don't know the combination. And I think it's unique to everyone, where taking those pills reacted a certain way in my brain and they felt really good. Like,
yeah.
And then it crosses over into addiction where you don't have that choice to take the pill or not. And I don't know the formula, and people want to know, like, how do we prevent it? How do we, like, exactly what happened to make you this way? So, and I know when people ask questions like that, it's because they want to, like, protect themselves or their loved ones. And it's so, I'm not the expert in the science of it. There's this author, Gabor Mate, who's a friend of mine, and I love him. And I love what he has to say about addiction. And we were in Costa Rica once and having breakfast, and he said, Lara, when you did opiates, what did it give you? And I was like, well, it made me feel joy. It made me feel connection to people. It made me feel peaceful. It made me feel hopeful. And he was like, the addiction's just a symptom of what you're looking for in your life. And so for me, like, my recovery now is like, I have to be sure that I'm getting all of those things that drugs gave me in the beginning, right? At the end, they don't give you any of that. But what I was looking for when I needed that sort of chemical courage to get, I have to make sure I'm getting that in my real life. Like, to me, that's my sort of area.
So how do you find those? How do you find that now?
I find it by not pretending. Because they're like, to me, my biggest trigger, my biggest warning sign for a potential relapse is if I'm pretending in my life. If you say, Lara, how are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine, when I'm not fine. Not that you want me to dump everything out, but if I'm like not okay at work and I'm not saying it, or I'm not okay in my relationship and I'm not saying it, and I'm just holding things in and not being honest and truthful about how I'm feeling about anything, or I'm actively pretending everything's great when it isn't. Like, those are my personal warning signs, and everyone's different. So, like, I'm on guard for that.
Yeah.
Because it's just a default. Like, my default is to say I'm fine. I don't need any help with anything, right? That's always been my default mode.
Yeah. And so so you notice that you are not feeling well, or you are, and you are telling people you're feeling fine. So what do you do at that point?
I catch right now I have awareness. So I catch myself because it's a habit of mine, right? To pretend that I have all my shit together at all times. Like, that's just ingrained in me, and I don't need help from anybody. And so what's different now is I have more close friendships, especially with women who will call me out on things, or that I feel safe enough to talk to go to and say, like, you know what, I'm having a really hard time with X, Y, or Z, or I'm scared. Or, even, I don't know, a couple months ago before the book came out, I was having this day where I was feeling like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, this book is about to come out. I was feeling vulnerable. I was feeling naked. I was like, oh, why did I just I've kept all these secrets for so many years and now I've just put them out there. And so I had a day, right? And I was not feeling good. And so what I did, which was not normal for me, it might be normal for other people, is actually, some of my children are adult children. So I called my oldest son. I was like, yeah, I'm having a day. I'm feeling this, and I just I called everyone I could think of, not just my children, but like my friends. I called everyone and outed myself for the day I was having rather than just stay in my own head.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a miracle. It sounds like a basic life skill that a lot of people know, but to me, it's magical when I do that. I'm like, oh, look at how grown I am,
Well, that and how much gratitude you must feel that you've built a community and you have people to call and say that to you that are there to receive that. And I think that, something really important that you said is that community is so important. And having connections and having people that really have your back is so super important. And I think that, as I think about my mom, I think that was one of the areas really lacking in her life. And one of the areas that maybe is why, I'm just putting this together now of why she couldn't come out of her addiction is because she was so isolated.
Yeah.
She was so isolated and she didn't have any connections. She didn't really have any friends. She had acted in such a way that her family kind of didn't talk to her that much anymore, and so that can be hard to build.
It's hard to build. And it's interesting because, when you're keeping your addiction secret, that's you're doing that by isolating. It's a disease where you isolate from people and you disconnect because you're guarding the secret. That's how it was for me. And that's the one thing that's going to help you. So it is really tricky, and I think that's why initially, there's this old study and I don't know it. Have you heard of that rat park study with addiction?
I know, not off the top.
You should look this up. So I can't remember the scientists or any of that, but basically they did this experiment on mice or rats. It was rats, and they had cocaine water, right?
Yes.
And they are drinking the water and they're all addicted and they're getting skinny. And then they put them in a different environment where a beautiful rat park, like games and other rat community. And they still had the cocaine water there and they didn't go for it, right? Yeah. It was the most healing thing. And I think, for me, the isolation that comes with addiction, the shame that comes with addiction, the shame that comes with incarceration, that just builds in isolation and it heals in community. And that's really, I think, it took me a really long time to get there because I was, keeping my secrets and so full of shame. But when I had a community that knew who I was, knew my past, and still loved me anyway, that's all I wanted. That's all. Right. That's all I wanted. Even with the drugs, someone to know me and see me and love me anyway.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm so happy that you have that now. And kind of speaking of isolation, and one of the things you talk about in your book, I think you reflect on a lot, is just having a challenging childhood. And speaking of isolation, am I right in saying that you felt isolated and disconnected growing up in your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I felt very much alone my whole childhood, and I grew up in a family that was, with addiction. It was violence, it was chaos. A lot of it I've blocked out. But it was also a family that had no language for feelings or emotions. No one said, how's your day? How are you feeling about that? There was just nothing. And so, the language of emotions has been really interesting for me to learn. And I could always access it in writing, but face to face, person to person, where you feel super vulnerable, that's my learning curve as an adult, right? And I told you, one of the things I did, and this isn't in the book either, but one of the things I did before I started writing the book, and the way nonfiction books work, you do a book proposal, it sells, and then you have a year to deliver the manuscript. In my case, it's Simon & Schuster. And so I went on a ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm only going to do this book if I can be really honest, right? Really, really honest. And I knew that I had to access a deeper part of me that I didn't like have access to growing up or whatever. So I did a week-long ayahuasca retreat. And it was really interesting because I kind of like in one of the journeys went back to childhood and realized like where and how and when it was that I learned that I was safer alone, right? Like that was something I learned, like I'm safer alone. And then I carried that into my adult life, and I translated in my head as like, oh, I prefer to be alone. I don't need anyone. I don't, and so it was like, oh, it's actually the opposite now as an adult woman. And I, that was a really like deep thing. And I learned like, oh, my own emotions are embarrassing to me, like, so I had to kind of go through all of that before I started working on the book.
And so how was your experience with ayahuasca?
It was intense, and it was really hard as someone who is, at the time, let's see, 13 years off of drugs, then go do ayahuasca, right? And so I had Gabor Mate, who I mentioned, I talked to him before, and he was like, Lara, you have to understand this is medicine, not drugs, and you have to think of it that way. But I will tell you, like the first night, we did 4 journeys in the week-long retreat in Costa Rica. And the first night when I took the ayahuasca, it's the first time I'd had like a substance in me, and I knew it was medicine, but it felt like a drug. And I was like, and there's this moment where I felt like I was kind of on my mat, and I was like, oh my God, like, am I just getting high in the jungle with strangers and calling it healing? Like I had this moment like where I had to check in myself, right? And no, it was not. Yeah. It was not that, but it was, it was like just to have that feeling in my body of being overtaken by something.
Yeah.
And
I mean, psychedelics are never your thing though, were they?
No.
And I've heard that, I mean, did you throw up and everything? I've heard it's like pretty intense and not something that you would do like recreationally all the time.
No, it's definitely not a recreational thing. It's not like you're going to take some ayahuasca and go to a concert,
Yeah.
But yeah, I did throw up, which is like my least favorite thing to do in the world. And the thing I was most worried about that besides like dying, right?
Yeah.
But, the place I went was like really trauma informed and had facilitators and had indigenous shamans, and it was magical. Like it was a really great thing. by the end of it, I was like, I'm never doing this again. And then after time passed, I'm like, oh, if I do it again, I think I would go deeper because I was so afraid and so trying to maintain control, so I think I would go back to this place. And, it's, you can't lie when you're on ayahuasca. Like it really it really brought up some profound changes in my life besides helping, I think, do the book, but it just really sort of was this catalyst afterwards to changing a lot of things.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd feel comfortable like sharing as like downloads that you got from it? Or also if it's personal, you don't have to say anything because I know sometimes those things can be personal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think part of that sort of, I really wanted to try and remember the things I'd blocked out. Like that was kind of one of my intentions. And so it did help me like sort of go back in my childhood more. And one of the things, because I always thought like my baseline, like I'm a person who likes to play, and I can be, like my nature is like joyful and a little immature / silly, like
funny.
Even though I'm not funny yet here, but funny, but I think like, so, but I always thought like, God, do I have a baseline of sadness? Like I felt like my baseline is actually sadness because like, it used to be that like on the weekends, and this is just, up until like a year ago, on the weekends when I'm not so busy with work and my to-dos and the kids and everything, and I have nothing to do, I'd be like, oh, am I sad? Am I depressed? Is this who I am? Am I just distracting myself from that? And so one of the really powerful things in the ayahuasca journey is it kind of went back to my mom in my childhood. She left me when I was 4 somewhere, basically with strangers. And I had blocked out that whole time at a house that was where the violence and the chaos and everything was. And her mom, who I never met, had committed suicide. And so I got this really clear message that sadness I was carrying was not mine. It was my mom's. It was my grandmother's. And so that really helped let that go.
Yeah.
That was really powerful. Yeah.
And that is such an intuitive thing for you to realize during that journey, because there's studies that show that, your vagus nerve, and, your vagus nerve has tone that helps kind of balance out your sympathetic and parasympathetic, and helps also, communicate to all your organs and stuff. But what the research study showed was that the mother passes along the vagal tone to their children. And so, when the children comes out, they have, like, if the mom was stressed out and the vagal tone was like very disrupted and very, like, on the sympathetic side of things, the child will come out that way with that same vagal tone. And so it's just, it puts a lot of pressure on mom,
Yeah.
I was like, well, shit, that's why everyone's so fucked up around here.
One more thing to be guilty about. Yeah.
But it's repairable, right? And so as we learn the tools, we teach our kids the tools. And it sounds like you are on a mission to end the cycle of generational trauma. I'm doing the same thing. So I can relate to that. But I just thought it was interesting that, like, intuitively, when you do these journeys, things become apparent to you, and it's like they're true, like research back things, So it's like, really, we're so intuitive as humans, and all the things that have happened to us over our lives, like, kind of puts a damper on all of that. And that's why I'm a big fan of the alternative medicine therapies, psychedelic therapies, because I really think I've done an MDMA therapy that I've talked about on the podcast before, so I won't go on into it again. But yeah, it was very helpful for me, and I'm still, like, it was over like 3 years ago, and I'm still integrating, like, what I learned during that journey. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
But I know, outside of journeys like that, I know that writing has been a big tool for you in your healing. And so maybe talk a little bit about how writing has contributed to your healing, and how you use writing to work through some of these things.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the first line of my book is reading was my first addiction. And the way I coped with the trauma in my childhood was books. Like, I read really early on. I read every book I could find. I read and read and read. And, like, you can't read that much without then starting to write. I think, like, it's like the gateway drug to writing. And so writing was something I did my whole life, from early childhood on. And it's something I got a lot of attention for and praise for, at school. And I was good at it. Right. And that's what I studied in college and graduate school, was writing. And then I stopped writing. And, when I say I was like a late bloomer to addiction, like, writing was always how I processed my feelings, how I made meaning in the world, how I made sense of things I saw or felt or, like, witnessed. And it was when I stopped doing that, it was like after graduate school, I started having my children. I was in an unhappy first marriage. My husband was cheating on me, and I wasn't writing in that time. And that's when I picked up the first, like, pain pill that I thought, oh, this makes me, like, able to pretend I'm happy. When I think I was, like, depressed at the time, and it's sort of self-medicating. But the whole time I was under addiction, the various times in my life, like, I never wrote. I can't write and do drugs, right? So that's also kind of my sort of sober. Yeah, a little bit, right? So I stopped writing. And I started writing again when I was in jail. I was off the drugs and I was in jail. And I started writing again, little stories, like little poems. And then I started ghostwriting in jail, like helping the other women write letters to judges to get passes or to get put into treatment instead of prison and things like that. And so, that love, when the drugs are gone, my love for words and writing and storytelling and making meaning and, like, I love to write things that make people cry and make people laugh, and all of that came back. And so it saved me when I was young, and then I forgot when I was older that that's what saved me. It's really
cool. And I think that, something to pull out of what you're talking about here is, I think it's, like, so important for people to have creative outlets to help, maintain their mental health, whether it's writing, whether it's art, whether it's dancing. For me, I find creativity doing these podcasts and promoting health and wellness, and it keeps me within my own practice. And, what suggestions do you have for people, and maybe let's just pick writing. It's so hard to sit down and get started. Like, someone like, even for me, like journaling, I know it's really good and you need to put pen to paper, but I really struggle with sitting down and just doing it. So like, what is your process for making yourself just sit down and do it? And I know you, like, besides going and spending weeks and weeks in Hawaii or wherever you go, for the average person.
I went to Thailand for 2 months to write the book. No, I think everyone has everyone has creative expression, right? And so I think it's really to like figure out what yours is, like what brings you joy. Like if you know you need to journal and you hate it, it's not your thing, and that's okay. Like you don't have to do that. Like, or there's no virtue to writing versus like, doodling versus whatever your expression is. Like I am horrible at all arts and crafts. Like I can draw any picture, it'll look like a 5-year-old did it. Like it is my worst thing. And I just don't do it because I'm like, it doesn't give me joy because that stresses me out. Like if you put a paintbrush in front of me, I'm going to freak out like someone would with a blank screen. But I like, but for those people who do have like writing is their thing, I think people get really stuck on like waiting for inspiration, like wait. So I think they get stuck in 2 ways. One, waiting for inspiration or the muse or a big idea that no one's had. Like the way you become a writer is just to write. Like you just like, I don't care if you write the same sentence over and over again. And there's something really interesting that if you do a practice of it at a regular time, it comes. Like if you find yourself getting stuck, and you just sit, if every day at 4:00, I'm going to spend an hour writing because I'm a writer, for people who have that expression, you just do it and your brain and your spirit and your creativity catches up to your habit. I think creativity catches up to habit. And the other thing I think that gets people stuck who are writing is that they just don't have enough information, right? Yeah. So you don't, like sometimes I have to percolate a story. Like, I'm actually been like really percolating on a novel I want to write as a next book. And fiction is what my background is in, but that's not, I've written 12, 13 nonfiction books as a ghostwriter and then my own book. But sometimes you just need more story before you can sit down to write. And so you just, write those stories. But I think, I think people get, and also the other part, this is the other thing I wanted to say, is we have like an internal critic and censor that is judging everything we're doing as we do it. And then that will kill your creativity instantly.
Yeah.
If you start thinking like, who's going to read this? What are they going to think? Is it any good? Well, the minute you get into that sort of internal critic voice, then it just, that takes the joy out of it.
So let's apply the same framework you're talking about to how you went and got into comedy, stand-up comedy, right? So it's a different topic, but maybe like, how did you, like, first of all, when did you decide you wanted to be a stand-up comic? And then how did you prepare for that? Because I listened to that and it's so funny. It's so super funny.
So where I started was improv, right? And so I decided I wanted to do things that terrify me. Right? Like I want to do things that terrify me, but like in a healthy way, not, like, I'm going to steal from my neighbors thing way, right? Like, or I'm going to
can't steal from your neighbors anymore. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah. But I like that. I'm someone, I always have to have something new that I'm trying.
Yeah.
Like I always have to have some big crazy goal. Like, I'm like not the youngest person anymore, but I like feel like I'm just getting started. I'm like, what am I going to do next? Like what? Yeah. Like I like to have a big thing I'm going for. Like I decided I want to run a marathon. Like I don't actually start running. I read 17 books about running first and then I start running. But that's me, right? Like I read a book on the anatomy of the foot, super boring, just to prepare for running. But so I always wanted to try improv comedy. I don't know where that came from. And it terrifies me. Like as a writer, like going off script, like just like, and as someone who's guarded and like been careful with people and don't want to be vulnerable. And, so it terrified me. So I was like, I have to do that. And so I went to a Saturday morning improv class at the Fun Institute. It's adults only. It's every Saturday. And it was terrifying and super fun. And it was, they say improv really helps heal trauma, like play. And there's science around this. I didn't know that at the time, but I loved it. And I went back and I sucked at it at first and I had no idea what I was doing. But that's where I found my first community because like it was like this group of people who were all very creative, artists, writers, actors, this or that, and no judgment, everybody being silly. And, after being in jail and like hustling and struggling and grinding to rebuild my life, there wasn't a lot of play in it, which is super important. And so I did that. And then that was my gateway drug to stand-up comedy, because a woman in the class was a stand-up comic, and she's like, hey, I'm going to teach a stand-up comedy class. And all it took was for her to say, I think you'd be good at it. And I was like, oh, really? You do? Okay, then I'll do it, And stand-up comedy was easier for me because you can write out jokes and then it's just about performance.
Yeah.
So it's easier in some ways to me than improv. But I do improv every Saturday still and like have this whole community. But that was the first group where I did a stand-up routine about going to jail as like a safety net, because it's hard to make friends, right? Like it's hard to like if we're moms, Caden's in second grade, like, oh, my daughter wants to come to your house for a play date. And I was like, but would you want her to if you knew my it was like this really tricky thing and isolating, because I can't just tell random moms my past. So I did this routine about getting Mama Love, my jail nickname. And afterwards people were like, wait, is that true? And it was like this moment, like, do I say yes or no? Because I really like these people. I have fun. And I said yes. And they were like, literally like, cool, you want to go to lunch? Like, it was no big deal. And so that was my first baby step to this book, being brave enough to just like own my story.
Yeah.
Honestly.
There's so many good themes you're bringing up. I'm hoping that people are picking up on, you've mentioned, because all of us are broken, whether we want to realize it or not, we're broken in some way. And I really feel like our purpose on this earth is to, not to the point of where you're focusing on it all the time, but to end up at the end of your life a better person than maybe, you were in going into adulthood, right? Because you go through childhood, if you have great parents and a great upbringing and you have no trauma, I mean, good on you. But most of us don't come out of childhood, with a clean slate. And then there's just this, and what I really love, about you, and what I love about a lot of people I bring on this podcast is there's just like this realization of that, hey, like there's things that we can do to be the best person that we can be, that, acknowledging healing, acknowledging that we want to, not continue things on in our life that maybe we picked up from our parents or whatever. And this healing journey that, that most of us are on, that are aware, this healing journey, and all the ways that you are expressing that you've gone through that through creativity and through setting goals and through challenging yourself. And I mean, it's beautiful to so many people, that are not even addicts. I mean, your story is so impactful. You don't have to be an addict to do all these things. I mean, you just have to realize that we all have shit we need to deal with.
Everyone's got shit. Everyone has shit.
And if you don't think you have shit, then you probably have the most shit.
And you don't think you have shit, and you're actually in danger, right? Like that's like a red flag for yourself. I think what's interesting is I used to always think, for a lot of years, up until this year, really, like that trying to be a better person each day, or do better, was like meant I had to do more. I had to do more. I had to try more. I had to read more books. I had to do this. And this year it's been really different. Like to me now, like being better than I was this year than last year means like I'm actually sleeping 10 hours a night. Right. Like I'm actually like taking care of myself in all the ways and putting myself first. And that's a like very different mindset than I had before that,
You saying that is reminding me a little bit about something I've been trying to focus on, is the difference between like the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I mean, what you're really saying is like, and I feel like as women, we start to drop more and more into that divine feminine because we spend so much of our life in this masculine role of like, in childhood, like trying to keep yourself alive, trying to keep yourself safe. And then you go, okay, then because I need to be independent and I need to make money, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a job, and then I'm going to have kids and I'm going to run this family and I'm going to do all this stuff. And you're sitting there and you were just like full on, like, and it's a masculine type of thing. And then you start to realize as you get a little bit older, like, no, like where it's at is being restful, is knowing that everything is going to work out. Everything is coming to you if you just get quiet. you have to get quiet, this constant pushing and this constant forcing and this constant of like, it's good to have goals, but to have goals in a way that's more gentle and more open, and not like, I'm going to reach a goal and it's going to look exactly like this. And if it doesn't look like that, it means I didn't reach my goal. It's like setting a goal and being like, I'm going to just go on this journey and see what happens. And my end result might be a little bit different, but like, no matter what, I enjoyed the journey, and sleeping and like resting and all of that. Like, I feel like that is such a good thing for more of us to drop into, because that it is a trauma response, I think, to live in like that sympathetic, like in charge of everything. It's exhausting. And so I'm totally aligned with that. I'm like trying to call in more of that like divine feminine energy of where it's just like a releasing. And it's like, it feels so good. Just like kind of let stuff go a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is just like, what can you control and not control? And I think there's like, I think before my, I think I had a really, like rebuilding a life starting with nothing at my age, post jail was just like, it was like hustle and grind and prove myself, like prove I'm worthy, prove it to myself, prove it to the world.
You're also trying to get your son back.
Yeah, I was fighting to get my son back, my kids back, like I had zero, like homeless, everything. Yeah. And so I think for me, especially with addiction, is like, I was so self-destructive. Sorry, you can hear my dogs barking, but I was like really self-destructive. And that's how I lived my life, like trying to survive, but also being really super self-destructive every day, and also trying to kill myself every single day, just like inefficiently with drugs. And so for me, there was like, I was always competitive, like whether it's masculine or feminine, like I was competing with myself rather than like kind of collaborating with myself. And that's why I do the sort of, if I'm dividing things up like that, I think it's like listening to my body. Like I will not set an alarm clock. Like I'm not going to set an alarm clock. And I was always someone who like, I like super pride, like I can live on 4 hours of sleep, and I don't, but now I sleep a lot better now. I think now that I'm just more in alignment with like what I'm doing for work, what I'm doing in my personal life, what I'm doing for my creativity, like all of that. So I think that helps me sleep better. But I do think it is just like listening for addiction, especially, is like you have to disconnect from your body to be an addict in many ways, right? And so it's just like listening, like, what do I need? What will like give me comfort in this moment? Like what, if I'm just going to lie on the couch all day, maybe that's okay. Because I would lie on the couch all day, but then I'd feel guilty and like berate myself and like, oh, you're lazy, or, like that self-talk.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, you know what? This is going to be my day. I'm going to binge this show all day and not work my brain and not work my body, and I'll be okay with that today. And it's just like, it's always this balance. And I'm super ambitious. I have goals. I always, but it is just finding that balance constantly. And it changes day to day, moment to moment, hour to hour sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Listening to your body is super important, and knowing when to rest. Those are also good things to consider. Let's switch and talk about the topic of forgiveness. Both for yourself and for others. I know I mentioned, I felt like, and it seemed like he agreed, your second husband was kind of the villain a bit. And I know that you probably have a lot of things you're working through forgiving yourself around. And, what skills have you learned that helps you release that narrative? Like release yourself from that narrative, and maybe what are some of your grounding principles that help you kind of let go of those feelings that you might have for like your mom or your past partners? Or
I mean, it's way easier for me to forgive other people than to forgive myself. Like I know that, and because it's easier for me to look, my ex-husband was an addict. Like I sponsored women. I understand addiction. And I would find at the time, and in our marriage, I would have empathy for like maybe a woman I was sponsoring in recovery who was struggling, but I couldn't have that same empathy like when it was in my house.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's realizing people are doing the best they can at any given moment with wherever they're at, that the choices they make are the best choices they are making for them at that time, and just kind of having empathy and understanding. Like I unless I've walked in someone else's shoes and I've been in their consciousness, like I can't really judge them for their choices, unless I'm like really, that's why I love memoir, like books in general, because there's no other way you're as close in another person's head. Like not watching a movie about someone, like when you're reading something and it's the I voice and you're that person, like then you're kind of that's hacking empathy. You're understanding why they're making those choices, even if you like are screaming at them. So for me, it's always been easier to forgive other people and understand. Yeah, I think as a writer, like I understand motivation in a way, And so I'm like, okay, I can see why you did that. And I understand why you did this to me or that to that person. But to forgive myself, that was the hardest thing for me. And so, I wish I had like 3 guiding principles, but one, I think to have compassion that people are doing. First of all, no villain ever thinks of themselves as a villain, right? And also what helps me too is like, I know that no little kid is ever like, when I grow up, I hope I can be an addict. Right. When I grow up, I hope I can go to jail. When I grow up, I hope I can be a criminal. When I grow up, I hope like society will shun me. Like no one is wanting that, And so like to remember that helps me have more compassion. And, I think forgiveness is about compassion, ultimately. And I think even for myself, it's, that's been the long, hard road for me, because I felt judged by the community and unforgiven by the community and by people in my life and old friends, but no one was doing it as much as I was doing it to myself.
Yeah.
No one was judging me as hard as I was. And so I think having compassion for my own choices and saying I did the best I could do at the time, and that helps. And then I think, forgive, like I worked on the book of forgiving with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who's like, when he's alive, he was the leader of forgiveness, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in that book, which I worked on like shortly after I was out of jail, like years away from my own forgiveness. But it was really just like, for me to be able to, if I need to ask you to forgive me, I have to be able to stand and listen to all the ways that I've hurt you and receive that, right? And like really ask you like what, and part of this is 12-step principle too, like you make amends, like what can I do to make this up to you, to make this right, to make amends? And so maybe it's something like, well, stay out of my life. Okay. Yeah. And I can do that, or it's, I need to see, with my own children, my son Dylan said to me when I got out of jail, my oldest son, he said, and I got this a little wrong in the book, and he just corrected me at a book event. He said, forgiveness is automatic, Mom, but trust is earned, something like that. Like he forgave me automatically because he loved me because I'm his mom and I made mistakes, and forgiveness for that, compassion. And then the trust you have to earn back. And so I think, it's a process, but I don't think we move forward or grow or change or become different people if we can't forgive ourselves for who we were at any given time. It's like impossible.
Right. Yeah, you can't hold on to it. It depends on and it kind of reminds me of that saying about anger. Like holding on to it, it's almost like you're wanting something else to happen to somebody else, but it's really just sitting there and affecting you.
Yeah, it's like drinking poison and thinking someone else is going to get sick, right? Yeah. Or something like that. It's like that. Well, I mean, I've never been a big grudge holder, partly because my mind gets distracted easily and I forget why I'm mad at someone. But I'm like, wait, why am I mad at you? So that makes it easier to forget when you just forget things. But also, it's just time and space too, like would I prefer not to have had my face on the front page of the paper with a bad headline? Yes. Was I really upset at the time? Yes. And now it's like, okay, that's just, it doesn't have the same charge. Time heals a lot.
Yes. And as part of your 12-step, did you have to go, or did that include going back to any of your neighbors at all and making amends, or was it just to close like family members?
Yeah, I didn't go back to my neighbors, mostly because like I was on probation for a long time and I wasn't like allowed back there. But part of it was like I don't know what they want from me, like what they want I paid my restitution, so I did my things there. And part of it was I really believe that what they wanted from me was to stay away from them, which I did, and we'll see, like I would love to have a like reconciliation conversation, but if they want it, like obviously the book's out there. I do see some of them around. I actually ran into a neighbor. The New York Times did a profile thing and they took pictures of my old neighborhood. And I was like, really? And then, because I hadn't been back there, I was like, really, we're going to do this? And the local paper too. And one of the neighbors came by and I thought that was her. And I was like, oh no. Because the last time I saw her was like when I was sentenced and she was part of this mob of angry people. And she said, I'm really happy for you. I wish you nothing but happiness.
Oh.
And congratulations. And I said, thank you, you too. So and maybe that's enough. Like we're not going to be like we were where we're bringing food to each other's house, right? Like,
but that must have felt really nice.
It felt good. And it was like, I hid from people from so long. And so I think like I'm open to any conversations people want to have, and I'm not going to force myself onto anyone to feel better myself. It's kind of
right.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, you served your time. You've stayed sober. I think that, that's huge. And like I said earlier, I really have come to you trying to disconnect the person from the addict. But not everyone has that experience.
Yeah.
To change topics real quick, there's something else I want to ask you about. So kingpin is not the right word. What did you call yourself?
Not shot caller.
Shot caller. So I don't know the difference between a kingpin and a shot caller, but thinking of you as a shot caller. Oh, shot caller. Okay, I was thinking of like a shock collar. I was like, wait a second. Okay, shot caller. Jeez Louise. Okay, so it's hard for me to kind of think of you as this like shock caller in jail. But I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about like how you spoke a little bit about it earlier, but how you like rose the ranks, I guess, and then also if you wanted to talk about how that led, if it's connected to the nonprofit.
Yeah.
You have.
Yeah. So I think, a good way for people, like shot caller is like a jail term. It's kind of like, what I learned in jail is people create family wherever they are, right? Like you create community and family. It's our nature. We're like hardwired to be a tribe and in connection with each other, and regardless of where you are. And in any kind of like group, there's hierarchies, right? There's like, so I think one way for people who have no experience with jail, it's not like you see on TV or the movies, but I think like a good way for like other moms, it's like president of the PTA, right? Like that's the shot caller of the PTA. She's organizing the fundraising and the thing. It's kind of like, like that's the best way I can think of to describe it. But I think, it's like I was a lot older than most of the women I was in jail with, and I was a mother with nowhere to give my mother energy. So it's not like a shot caller, like I was shaking people down or bossing people. But I think like who I was, not on drugs, was just someone who's curious and compassionate and wants to help by nature. That's kind of like, I don't know what my Enneagram is, but it's probably skewing helper side. But so I think like, because I was helping, because I had a master's degree, and I was helping with writing the letters, I think that's really what it was like in there. And, these were a lot of women, like, but the women I were with, like people are like, oh, are you like skewing white savior? Like, not at all. The women I was with in jail saved me. Yeah. They took care of me. They gave me purpose and meaning. They like took care of me when I was detoxing. They taught me, like I was a stranger in a strange land. And so, but really it was just mama love. It was just like energy and compassion. And I think like we really helped each other. Like all of us were going through you have a group of people together going through like the lowest point of their lives, most of whom are mothers separated from their children. Also, we had all of these things in common and we supported each other and helped each other. And, it's not like it's not a great place. There's other places to get support and help. But I think the way people think about jail, like from the movies, or like people fight, there were some fights, but really it was just like you would have when you have a large group of women who've made, not the greatest life choices all under one roof, like there's tensions and things, and you need people to keep the peace. So that's all a shot caller does, kind of mediate the peace a little bit. But, I started a nonprofit with Cynthia Chase, who's like the former mayor of Santa Cruz. And I did this original Gemma program when I was in jail, in the minimum security jail, which is like kind of a life skills program, but it was like a little community, and they had volunteer instructors, and it was super helpful. It helped pass the time, and it gave me purpose and meaning. And while I was in jail, and it was started originally by women in jail, who said, let us tell you actually what we need. Because it was my first time in jail, and I would be like, I'm never coming back. I'm never, ever coming back. And I would see a girl get out. We'd have a big goodbye party for her in jail. And then a week later, she'd be rearrested and back in there. And I was like, how is this happening? Like, how, like what? But you were so full of hope. And what I didn't know until I got out of jail and started to have to navigate the probation system, and navigating it from a place where I have all the privilege of being a white woman. I have a master's degree. I had some family support. And it was so both impossible to not go back to jail. Like, it's a setup for failure. And I had no idea. And also, there were lots of times when I thought, oh my God, I would be safer in this world back in jail. And that's why people go back to jail, and also like poverty is the number one predictor of recidivism. So you get out of jail, you don't have a place to live, you're more likely to go to jail. You have to have a job where 87% of employers like make you disclose a criminal background. So you're excluded from that job, and you're going to earn 60% less if you have a criminal background. And 1 in 3 Americans, men and women, have been arrested. They have an arrest record, So all of
mentioning like you don't have a car, you can't get anywhere.
Yeah, you can't get to like, you have to drug test on demand within an hour, but you have to find a job with a criminal background who will then let you leave on a moment's notice any given day, which is like impossible. So it's a setup for failure, and it's a way, and it's ways in which you have to keep paying forever, right? Like, you pay for your crimes, do your sentence, do your probation, but then we expect people to keep paying in all of these other ways. Like I couldn't homeschool Caden when I wanted. I was like thinking about homeschooling. I was like, oh, I actually can't because I have a criminal record. Like, it's just like crazy things where I can't get certain benefits or subsidized to go work. So I co-founded a nonprofit called the Gemma Project based on the original with Cynthia Chase. And it is like to help currently incarcerated women and formerly incarcerated women navigate probation, do programming that helps them in jail, because women respond to programming, and it's like they're the last resource paid for in the prison and jail system, right? That population. And, there's like a 750% increase in women going to jail. Like, it's the fastest growing population.
Yeah.
On Mother's Day, I read this, this post from someone who is a public defender. They said like on Mother's Day, the arrest rates go down like the biggest of any day of the year, which shows you just how many mothers are committing crimes.
Yeah.
And how if we're just nice to them, they won't, right?
Right.
No, it was like really funny.
We're so under-supported, just in general. And then what really opened my eyes when I read your book is just another confirmation that, our incarceration system is not set up for rehabilitation.
No.
At all. Like it made it so difficult for you to get back on your feet, get your son back, which is like, thank goodness Caden had your ex-husband, right, to go live with. But imagine if he was in the foster system, like he was in the foster system, I think. But, but with somebody new.
Yeah, what happens is a lot of women in jail, like 80% have children. Often they're the sole caregiver. So like the foster care system and women's incarceration are very like linked. And you have a court you have one court in the same county saying, okay, you have a year to reunify with your child to not lose your parental rights. And then you have another part of the same court system saying, okay, well, now you're sentenced to 18 months in jail.
Yeah.
Right? So there's like the lack of coordination, and it varies county by county, state by state, so it's like a lot of work to do. So yeah, so I'm really happy we've started this nonprofit, and we've got a lot of exciting things in the works.
And what's the name of it?
The GemmaProject.org.
The GemmaProject.org. Another way, that you're coming out of this situation and just like giving back and doing really good things with a very challenging situation. So I love that you're doing that, and just, your book opened my eyes to so many things that I hadn't ever thought about. And that's going to be really important work.
Yeah.
So in closing, I think we covered a ton here. What do you want most, like, from your story and what you've shared today? Like, what do you most want people to gain from your story? And like, what is the legacy you want to leave behind?
Oh my God, the legacy. That's like that first question. I've, in my career post-jail, I've worked with a lot of really amazing people. Like, I've been very good adjacent, right? And I think what I want people to get from my book most of all is like, because I was hustling so hard to prove that I was good and to prove that I was worthy. And it took me it took me a lifetime, but well over a decade post-jail to learn that I was good and worthy regardless of my experiences, right? And that I didn't need to have that shame and that secrecy and that silence. So, I hope people, they may not relate to going to jail, but everybody has something they're ashamed of, or some secret, or something they're afraid people will find out. And I think there's just so much power in owning your story as women, and owning your truth, and speaking up, and knowing that you're good and worthy and loved just in all your broken messiness, right? Just as you are on any given day, in any given moment. So I hope that's the legacy too.
Yeah. I love that, Lara Love. And I love you. And thank you so much for spending the time with me. And just thank you for, being so honest and raw and sharing your story and all that you do to give back to the community. I think it's really, I'm excited about your Gemma project. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you, or if they want to buy your book?
So if they want to learn more about like helping incarcerated women, they can go to the GemmaProject.org. They can go to my Instagram, which is just Lara Love Hardin. I've learned Instagram now. And then the books anywhere, like any indie books, any bookstore, Amazon, anywhere they can look it up. Just Google it.
Yep. I got 3 copies. I got one on Amazon. You gave me a pre-launch copy, and then I had to buy another one so you could sign it when I met up with you in New York. So
yeah.
Going.
And it's on audio, which I narrated if anyone wants to listen instead of read. Not everyone likes to read. But it's on audio. Yeah. And soon to be a TV series, maybe.
Oh, that's right. Super excited about who's going to play you. Do you have any idea? Are they thinking about it?
I don't know that yet. I do get approval over who plays me, but...
you do?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Okay, well, we'll have to...
Like someone young and cute, younger and cuter.
Of course. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. And thank
you.
Soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Humanize the Hustle podcast. If you would like to get in touch with the show, email me at myalchemylife@gmail.com or follow me on Instagram at Wellness with Alicia. And if you like the show, please share it with someone you love and make sure and give us a 5-star review. Talk to you next time, and remember, health and happiness is non-negotiable.